Welcome to the Endurance Horse Podcast, where endurance riders from all across the globe gather, sharing their stories, goals, and progress as they train for and compete in endurance events at every level. So kick off your shoes, pull up a chair, and listen as we gather around the virtual campfire and listen to friends from across the world.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Endurance Horse Podcast. I am your host, Christina Hike. And today, as we step forward into this year of the horse, we actually are starting a new chapter on Endurance Horse Podcast. This year, we have the honor to be talking to those who serve the sport of endurance, the AERC directors, committee members, and those who give their time, their judgment, and their steady hands to guide endurance into the future. And today, we begin this series with someone who embodies longevity in the sport. 23,000 miles in the saddle. When I say that out loud, it almost feels hard to grasp. That's nearly the distance around the earth. That's more than 4,000 hours in the saddle. That's 4 decades of sunrises, dust, rain, snow, vet checks, finish lines, and the quiet miles in between. And today we're talking with someone who has lived every one of those miles. Marci Cunningham began riding endurance in 1983. Since then, she has accumulated over 23,000 lifetime miles and continues to serve the sport as Pacific Southwest Director and a member of the AERC Membership Committee. 23,000 miles. When I say that out loud, that's a lifetime of riding, a lifetime of horses, a lifetime of choosing to show up. But at the heart of it, she's simply a rider who kept saying yes to the trail. Marci, welcome to Endurance Horse Podcast. We are so glad you're here. Hello, Marci. How are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So before we get rolling, do you have any questions for me?
I can't think of any right now. I figured you'd be asking me all the questions.
I do ask all the questions, but let me just check my headphones real quick. Hold on. My headphones are turned up so loud, but your audio sounds a little bit low.
I do have a phone with a cord. Do you want me to try that and see if that's better?
That's a little better.
Is it better?
I think so.
You're still there?
I'm still here, and that is much better.
Okay. Well, this is an old princess phone.
Well, that's good, because then, you're the princess for the day, so that's good.
Okay.
Oh, that's good. So we'll start off where I always do, which is, how did you get into horses, Marci?
Well, I was one of those horse-crazy kids that didn't have a horse. Growing up, in grammar school, I was always playing with my little plastic horses, and I finally convinced my parents. They thought I would grow out of it. But when I got to junior high school, my dad said, well, if you stay on the honor roll all through school, we'll get you a horse. I said, okay. And I did. And then they had to follow through. So my very first horse was a gray young horse, probably maybe 4 years old or so, a gray mare. I always thought she had some Arabian in her because she was gray. But and I didn't even have a saddle for the first 6 months. But for Christmas, I got a saddle from the Sears catalog that I had picked out. And I had that horse till she died.
Wow.
And so I was very blessed. I took her to college with me, and we just rode all over the place. I was lucky we didn't have a place at home to keep horses, but my dad knew a farmer. We were kind of on the edge of town, about 6 blocks from our house, and he had an old dairy barn on his property, so we fixed up a little pen in there, and that was it. So,
wow. What was her name?
Her name was Lady Gray. So
that's beautiful.
And she was just we learned about horses together. She wasn't very well broke, but we just did everything together, all through high school. And I even got to take her to college for a couple of years. Then when I moved back home, and I moved from home to where I live now in Bakersfield after getting a job after college, I brought her to Bakersfield, and she lived a few more years after that. So
that's true dedication, because a lot of ads that you see with horses for sale, the excuse is, the owner's going to college.
Yeah, I keep things forever. I told my husband when we got married, I said, you don't have to worry about a divorce because I keep things forever.
I can relate to that. Yes, I am sentimental and I do keep things forever. So, how did you come about discovering endurance?
Was back in I was in high school from 1966 to 1970, and I always subscribed to Western Horseman magazine. And they always had an article about Tevis. And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be the most wonderful thing to do? That was the only thing I knew about endurance riding. And, so that the seed was planted then.
Mhm.
It didn't come to fruition until the early 1980s. One of my best friends from high school lived down in the Los Angeles area, and she was in a grocery store and saw someone in line with a T-shirt from an endurance ride. And she was a very bold person. She is a very bold person, and she went up to him and asked him about endurance riding. So then she made friends with that person and his wife, and because you didn't know how to find out about endurance
Mhm.
rides back then, there was no internet. It was all kind of like by word of mouth.
Yeah.
And so she got information about a ride that wasn't too far from us, and we thought we talked about it. And there were no books or anything. We said, I want to do that.
Mhm.
So we just started riding our horses. We didn't know just how far to ride or anything. And probably when I went to my very first endurance ride, it was down in the Little Rock area of California, which is between Bakersfield and Los Angeles over on the desert. Loaded up our horses, went, tied them to the horse trailer, and rode 25 miles. And I was just in awe of everyone that was there. People had jackets with patches on their jackets about how many miles they had done, the little mileage chevrons. So that was it. I said this is what I want to do, and that was in 1983
Mhm.
that I wrote. And in fact, I was looking. I'm one of those people that keeps a scrapbook, so I have like 4 or 5 scrapbooks with all of my ride completions and certificates in it. And that ride, my riding time was 3 hours and 48 minutes.
Mhm.
And I rode my appendix quarter horse. It was a horse that I used to show in hunter jumpers locally.
Wow.
And I got tired of that. I did that for about 5 years. And this was all after I was out on my own. I had a job, so I had some discretionary income. And I I always wanted to learn how to jump horses, so I did that. And I realized I didn't want to jump real big fences. When I got tired of riding round and round in circles in an arena, and I want to do endurance riding, but I didn't have an Arabian. I figured that's what you needed.
Hmm.
But a friend of mine at work knew Jim and Jackie Bumgardner
Hmm.
from Ridgecrest, and they were very involved in endurance riding. Jackie's in the Hall of Fame, the AERC Hall of Fame, and I contacted them, asked them questions, and said, "Do I need an Arabian?" They asked me what I had. They said, "Just ride the horse in your backyard,"
Mhm.
which was a wonderful thing for them to say because they bred horses. They could have tried to sell me a horse, but they didn't. So I rode that appendix quarter horse. I rode in a couple of 25-mile rides, and then we moved up to 50. And I think I rode him about in 3 or 4 50-mile rides. And I realized that he really wasn't built for endurance. He was
Mhm.
fine for the flatter desert rides, but anything that was mountainous, it was hard for him because he was a big horse.
Hmm.
Even though he was mostly thoroughbred, I found a home for him. I sold him to a friend of mine whose husband was looking for a good trail horse, and he lived out his life with them. And then I found a unregistered part Arab mare, and I just worked with her, and I actually rode that mare 2,000 miles in 50-mile rides. My goal with my horses has never been to ride fast. I always say I'm an endurance rider, not an endurance racer. That's how it all got started.
So, what was it about endurance riding that made you stick with it rather than switching to something else?
I think it's the freedom. And what I really liked is that regardless of where you finished, you got a completion award. I was used to the horse show or arena where, you got 5 or 6 placings and the rest of you walked out of the arena without anything. I thought, well, isn't that
Mhm.
wonderful? It's so inclusive. The to
Mhm.
finish is to win
Mhm.
really resonated with me.
I think it's something similar. It was my thought too, was that those miles are your miles now. Like,
That's
so
true.
if you spent the whole weekend showing and you're at the discretion of maybe one or two judges, that was their opinion on that day. But when you're out on the trail and you have that whole camping experience and you have all those miles, and yeah, that's your
Yeah,
completion. Those are your miles, and you walk.
you take possession of them, so to
Yeah, they're
speak.
yours now.
I never thought about it that way, but I think that's a wonderful analogy.
So, one thing I wanted to ask you about was when you look back to 1983, what did endurance look like then compared to now? What were the major differences, if any?
The horse trailers were a lot smaller.
That was my first thought too, with some old pictures of the two horse, yeah, the horse trailers, I
Yeah,
bet.
I had a true horse straight load trailer, and that's what most people had. And they, had some people, if you're real luxurious, you had a camper.
Mhm.
Um, but it was very simplistic, and not to say, there's nothing wrong with the living quarters trailers that we have today. They are certainly wonderful. But but they weren't in existence then. I don't even know what year did living quarters trailers start really being made. 20
Mm.
years ago, something like that. But it was a very simple sport. Really, it was not complicated. Been vast improvements made in AERC with training articles and things like that. I do remember how at the start of the rides, I they were kind of scary sometimes because there were a lot of unruly horses.
Mm.
I do remember there was one ride in the Sunland area that had a shotgun start.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And that was always interesting.
I think I
But
could do without that, but
I
some people might
I
think it might be interesting.
it's just the evolution of the crowd of the people that do it.
Mhm. That's
So
true. That's really true. Do you remember, your very first ride? We did talk about it a little bit, but, what stood out to you?
I remember it vividly, and I have pictures from it. Um, and I just remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, I hope I finish.
Mm.
I want to finish." And I trying to remember. I don't know if we all started at the same time or not. Between that there were two distances, 50 miles and 25 miles. Of course, there was no LD then. Those miles were never recorded or published. The placings for the 25 miler. So I don't even know how many people were on the 25-mile ride,
Hmm.
or the 50 for that matter.
This might
Um,
be changing gears kind of suddenly, but I didn't expect to hear that. I didn't know that 25 was just 25, without the LD designation.
mhm.
We were gonna get into some more tougher questions later, but maybe I'll just jump into that now. But do you
Sure.
think that would possibly help? I think somebody else brought this topic up. I can't recall where, but it was, that whole LD endurance thing.
Mhm.
Somebody was saying, why don't we just have mileages and drop the LD designation?
That's a good question. They were called a 25-mile was considered a training ride.
Mhm.
That's what was drummed into me by other endurance riders. You ride a training ride of 25 miles, and then when you're ready, you move up to 50s. And that's the old school and definition of endurance. But like all sports, the sport has to evolve.
Mhm.
So, but if I understand your question is, should all miles be added together? Is that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, and maybe this conversation won't make it into the podcast at
Yeah.
all, but,
Uh-huh.
kind of where my heart is, I haven't even been able to compete in a few years, and
Mhm.
when I did, I didn't that many, definitely not the mileage that I wanted to for sure, but my heart in it is the horse world is shrinking. I think we might have talked about this before, and the memberships, whether it's Quarter Horse Association reining barrel racing might be the only one that's growing because of social media, but just to have a bigger umbrella. I feel like, I'll just be transparent with you, I feel like maybe this sport, I'm learning more about it now that it actually started more on the East Coast than the West Coast, but that it seems the impression is it's the West Coast and it started with 100 miles. But as somebody was informing me from the East Coast, that it actually started out as competitive trail with multi-day rides, and that was kind of the distance riding competitive part of it. Everyone's impression is that it's kind of like Tevis started it with a 100-mile ride. Not to redraw the sport, but sometimes I think like jumping, for instance, you start with cross rails or poles on the ground, and then you gradually work your way up, and then it goes all the way up to Grand Prix. Not everybody wants to jump big. I know I didn't either. 3.6 was plenty for me. I didn't want to.
You and I are on the same page there.
But I think if you stand and you look at things from a jumper point of view, nobody's really going to push and say, you have to jump 5 feet, you have to jump, and I think we need that, take and adopt that in endurance in a way and say, well, it's okay. And I think it's really changing.
I think we're there almost, really. I mean, I remember all the furor over recognition of LD, and but that has created a wonderful niche for people that want to stay there, and I think that is a wonderful part of the sport. And for those that want to move up to 50, move up to 100, so there needs to be open doors at each level to encourage people. Now, what bothers me a little bit is there is no incentive for some people to move up to 50, and they get stuck at the LD level, and easy for them to ride 25 miles. But they have horses that are very, very talented, and they are very talented riders. So,
but couldn't that fall right back to jumping again? We wouldn't pressure somebody to want to jump 5 feet. If they're extremely happy jumping 2.6, why don't we leave them there?
And that's a very good point. And but I would like to see them. There is so much joy in, and for me, it was a wonderful sense of accomplishment when I finish a 50-mile ride. And even though sometimes, halfway through it, I think, why in the world am I doing it? So but that's a personal thing for me. So I guess to your point, if someone doesn't want that challenge, so be it. Leave the door open for them to do what they want to do.
I think every sport, mostly, even if it's not equestrian, let's just say somebody loves to ski at a certain level, but they don't ever want to do like this jumping off this, whatever they call that, when they jump really, that's okay, or if somebody's a swimmer and they love going off the high dive, but they don't want to be an Olympic high diving, I think it's okay. And I think we'll get more bees with honey kind of a thing if the culture permeates that it's great if you show up and you want to ride 25 miles. We want that, and that, like you said, open doors, leave the door open. If somebody wants to do 50, they'll be curious. If curiosity got them to the ride to even try 25 and they see the 50s and the 100s and the 75s and the pioneer riders, if they want to do that, they will. But I don't think that we should other anybody or pressure people that.
But do you think that's happening now? Because the rides I go to, the people that are doing the LD, I mean, they get just as much recognition at the awards dinner.
That's good.
Everybody cheers them, and no one looks down on LD anymore at the rides I attend.
I think it's an internet thing. I mean, but
you're probably right there, because when you don't have to look in someone's face, you can say anything you want. And that is one of my criticisms of all the internet chat groups and everything, because people just get mean. And so that's why I don't frequent them that much.
So I'm going to jump back into our questions because
Okay.
we totally went down a rabbit
I
trail.
know. Well, I enjoy talking with you, though.
I do too. I love talking horses, that's for sure. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to ask you, what early experiences still guide you, and what mistakes did you make that shaped you, and how you manage your horses?
One of the most important things that I learned early on is to ride your own ride. Don't get sucked up
Mm-hmm.
into riding a pace with someone else just because you're having fun at it.
Right.
You have to ride your own ride at what's right for you for your horse.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the most important things
Yeah.
I learned early on.
I would definitely say that too. If somebody was new that hasn't gone to their first ride yet, I would even tell them it's okay to wait 5 minutes or more after everybody else leaves.
Oh, absolutely. I still do that today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want, for one thing, I don't want to get involved in the shenanigans that might be going on.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I have friends that I go to rides. I'm a social endurance rider now. I go to rides and I ride with friends that we've planned on riding together. And what's wonderful is that uh, we know each other paces, and we trot a little, we walk a little, we trot a little, we walk a little. So, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know how to ride fast. That may sound like a strange thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
but at the top 10 pace, I don't really know how to ride that pace and have fun.
Right.
Nothing against the people that do it. That's just me.
The first time I wanted to ride 2 days back to back, I thought I'm going to wait a good past 5 minutes to even start, and I'm just
Mhm.
going to ride the back of the pack. And this was in August, I think. And so I did that. I waited till everybody left. It was so much more calm and relaxing to not be in the fray. And then
Mhm.
we did okay. And we were at the vet check, and I heard everybody complaining about the bugs were so bad. They've never seen the bugs so bad. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I didn't see any bugs. And then I realized when you let everybody go up ahead, they got all the bugs. And I thought, well, there's a bonus. And I also was riding extra slow because I knew I wanted to go the next day. And so I kept picturing in myself in the head saying, um, I want enough horse for tomorrow. And so I'm
and that.
going slow. And I stopped and I took pictures and video and I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
And then we did the next day and he did better the next day. I did
Mhm.
leave gas in the tank and I didn't have the bugs either. And so I thought, well, there are benefits and perks to not
Well,
knowing how to run up front. Um,
I'll tell you a little story about that. This wasn't bugs, but it was bees,
ooh,
and it was a ride. And again, hanging back, all the front runners scared up all the bees
oh
and
boy.
had to deal with them. And we just kind of rode through, and no one had any big problems, but it was really annoying,
Mm-hmm.
for them. And we just rode through. Bees? What bees? We didn't see any bees. So there are benefits to starting at the back.
Mid-pack to backpack,
Uh-huh.
definitely turtle benefits here. Um, Yeah. My horse the next day, because I didn't know how he was gonna be, and he's a heavier horse. He's like 17.2, and he's half draft horse. He's a big boy. He was hyper the next morning. He was
He said,
just
"Let's go."
jazzed, and he was more horse the next day, than the first day, and I have to admit that was one of my mistakes, what you mentioned was running and getting sucked up at somebody else's pace. Those were
Mhm.
mistakes that I made, and it's very hard to peel your horse back away from that.
Once you've done that, yeah, it is. And I made that mistake about 6 years ago. So sometimes we don't learn, and but no matter how many years we've been in the sport.
So here's your reminder, right? Don't get sucked up in the fray. It's okay to
Mhm.
start late. It's okay to go
Mhm.
slower. You'll have more horse
Yep.
the next day,
Yep.
and you'll avoid the bees.
That's right. and you'll have more fun.
I think so. You do have a good amount of fun.
I just did a ride, the Fire Mountain ride in January, and it's one of my favorite rides, a big one-loop ride, which I love more than rides where you have to come back to camp multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And we have lunch at the 25-mile mark. Come back on a, not exactly the same, we repeat a little trail, but some of it's a loop trail. But as we were at the last water stop, I was riding with two other friends of mine, but there were two gals who I knew that were there also. And they asked if they could just kind of follow behind us into camp. I think maybe we were 5 or 6 miles. Said because it was her horse's first 50. And so I said, okay, well, we're going to walk a little and we're going to trot a little, and that's fine. And the most important thing that I can impart to someone is, when you're getting near the finish, there's a challenge to yourself. Say, oh, I want to hurry and get in. And so my advice is, as long as you have plenty of time on the clock, you don't have to hurry to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Don't race in the last 5 miles. The old adage is the only placings you raced for are first place and 10th place. So, if you want to be top 10. So if you're 11th, you might want to race in to get a top 10 if that's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, enjoy the trail. Bring your horse in with his pulse down, especially if you're late in the day. And this was almost dusk when we finished. You don't want to be having to throw water on a horse to get his pulse down when it's getting chilly.
Mm-hmm.
So just ride smart, go in easy, and don't be in a hurry.
Ride smart. I like that. I hear that you're over 23,000 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean to you personally? Because I was trying to look that up, and I think that's around the world once, or almost around the world once. I think that is across the United States like 8 times. So I'm trying to wrap my head around 23,000 miles.
I'm going to tell you a funny story about that. When I first started, I've always had little goals when I ride endurance. Since I'm not riding fast, I always said, okay, what kind of goal? And I thought, oh my gosh, if I could ride 5,000 miles, that would be wonderful. And then I got to 5,000 miles and I thought, what if I got to 10,000 miles? And so just little increments like that. And I've been so blessed to be able to attend rides year round. Where I live, I ride 12 months out of the year. And I can go to rides 12 months out of the year if I want. I don't ride nearly as many miles as I used to. But there were 2 years when I rode over 1,000 miles.
Wow.
On the same horse. That was my Fire Mountain Zoom horse, who was actually, when I mentioned Jim and Jackie Bumgardner earlier, they had a stallion, Sierra Fadwa, who is in the AERC Hall of Fame. He was by Fadwa, one of his last crops of foal. It was always a stallion that I truly admired. Zoom, to me, was a once-in-a-lifetime horse, and I rode him for 5,600 miles, and he never was pulled during those miles. And one of those was Tevis in 2015 for the 60th anniversary. To attain that mileage goal, you just put one foot in front of the other. And I love going to the XP rides that Dave Nicholson puts on, because there is wonderful country that we can ride in that we otherwise would never get to see. I attended 2 of his XP cross-country rides. One was in 2004, where we started in Silver Springs, Nevada, and ended up in Lisco, Nebraska at the Rush Creek Arabian Ranch.
Wow.
And of course, and I went with a friend, and we each had one horse. So we were very realistic on what we could ride.
Mm-hmm.
And we only rode 2 or 3 rides per week on that trip over 6 weeks. And I think by the end, I was maybe riding 1 day a week. And I think I rode, of those 1,200 miles, I think I rode around 800 or so. But that was a wonderful experience. And then in 2011, we did an 8-week ride from St. Joe, Missouri to Nevada. And that was again, I only took one horse. And so I just rode smart. Sometimes I only rode a 25-mile day. You just have fun.
So was that Fire Mountain Zoom, was he the main horse? Did he have like the biggest amount of miles that added
Yeah,
to that?
he's my highest mileage horse. But I never rode him on those long XP rides because I didn't have him at the time. He kind of fell in my lap through a friend of mine. When I got back from the 2011 XP, a friend of mine who had bred him was looking for a home for him because they were no longer able to ride. And he was like 10 years old and never been to an endurance ride but had been trained for many years. So I bought him and it was a wonderful, wonderful horse.
Do you believe in starting them late into the sport?
Well, I've started horses as 5 years old, 5-year olds, and that horse competed for 15 seasons. I think it depends on how you ride, really. You know, if you want to race, then yes, by all means, wait. If you want to go down the trail and accumulate miles and ride smart, then I think, you can be riding 5 and 6-year-old horses. It just really depends on what you're willing to do, what's best for that horse.
You know what I really like is that unintentionally, I think the last 3 interviews I've done, the riders, which were very accomplished like yourself, their motto was really to go slow, and that
Mhm.
equaled longevity for them, for their horses. That's maybe a
Mhm.
good thing to just stop and think about. Plan your season and hear from these people that have longevity. It's okay to ride slow and to have a different goal. And do you ever think about that? That you've almost ridden around the circumference of the earth?
I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah,
So I always wanted to do a round the world trip, so I guess I can say I've done that.
you did. You did an around the world trip.
It took more than 80 days though.
It did. Well, that's just that many more days of enjoyment, right?
Absolutely.
So I actually just saw this recently where there was a person who's, I think they've done 125, are starting their horse, or maybe the horse had and they hadn't. I forget how that went. But they were saying, how do they create a training plan to do 25s for the year? So if you're talking to somebody who, I know I have experienced people, I have people of all levels that listen, but let's just say there's a person who just found endurance and this is their first year. They've been riding their horse, but how would they train if they were going to start maybe their first ride in the spring?
Well, I think one of the most helpful things to do is know how far a mile is. That was hard for me because we never, when I was starting out, we didn't have the little wristwatch GPSs that you could say, oh, yeah, okay, I know I'm going this speed and this mileage. Having an idea of how far something is. And then when I started out, I don't have a training plan that I have to adhere to. It's all, when I started out endurance ride, I worked full time, so I had to squeeze rides in the evening and on the weekend. When I first started out, boarded my horse. Now I'm fortunate I have my horses in the pasture at home, but I boarded my horses, which a lot of people do. I would try to ride 3 times a week, twice during the week and once in a long ride on the weekend. So I would try to ride maybe after work, depends on the time change and if you have daylight and everything, ride 5 miles during the week, 4 to 5 miles, walking and trotting. Not fast, not, no extended trotting, just maybe a 6 to 7 mile an hour trot and walking. I'm a person, I walk a little, trot a little, and that helps you as a rider too, because you've got to build up being able to ride at a trot for long distance. It was good that I came from the horse show world because I knew about posting and I knew about diagonal, which is very helpful. Now, jumping to now, I only ride once a week, but my horse is out in the pasture. And if you wait till your horse is perfectly fit and ready to go to a ride, you're never going to get to the ride. I think too many people obsess on what, gosh, is my horse ready? I haven't ridden enough. Sometimes you just go to the ride, experience the camping, and you will be surprised at how well your horse will do.
For your long ride on the weekends, what were those typically like at 25? Like maybe half of that distance?
If you're getting ready for a 25-mile ride, I don't think you need to ride more than 10 miles. You need to decide, okay, is my goal to eventually do 50? If your goal is to eventually do 50, you don't need to ride a whole bunch of 25-mile rides. As long as you have more of a Arab type of horse. Now, if you've got a horse with draft horse like yourself, you need more time. So it really depends on your horse.
This will probably be after Dennis Summers is on. But I
Mhm.
think Dennis might have mentioned about, I think it was him that mentioned that we have to be careful if we have a horse that is like an Arabian that is very talented at the sport, to not forget we still have to condition the bones and the ligaments and the tendons, because the horse will lie to you
Yes,
about
and
what
that's
he can do,
absolutely true.
and you will find
And
out later.
and that is the difference between a slow 50 and a fast 50, or a slow 25 and a fast 25, and the age of the horse. The younger the horse, the slower you have to take it. I think that's, you can't take an older horse and just dump him into a 50 either. You've got to know your horse. And I'm going to go back to what I said. Don't get caught up into someone else's ride.
Have you ever had to retire a horse that you loved deeply? And what was that season like for you?
You mean retire a horse mid-season,
No,
or just
just
just in general? Yeah, yeah. I've retired a lot of horses. I retired my first horse, my 2,000-mile horse. She was, probably 10 or 12 when I started her, and she started having hock problems and lameness issues, and I had no idea what she went through before I got her.
Mhm.
So I retired her. My next horse was a 3,000-mile horse, and actually she came back from a catastrophic injury to finish up. She was a Sierra Fadwa daughter, Fire Mountain Moonshine, and I rode Tevis on her. Actually, in a freak accident, severed a tendon
Ow.
on a front leg, and it was just a freak accident, and she hit, and it wasn't on an endurance ride. None of my horses never get injured on endurance rides. She actually hit her front tendon with her back leg, and it was just, and actually that tendon grew together,
Wow.
and she had 2 years off, I think, and I started riding her, and she was sound. And there's a little bit of ego involved. I really wanted to get her to 3,000 miles, and she needed one ride. So I came back and I rode her in a 50-mile ride. It was a flat ride. I knew she could do it, and she got her 3,000 miles. There's always some ego involved there, and we have to keep our ego in check.
Yeah, especially if we're people who are driven by hopes and dreams and goals and mile
Mhm.
markers. It can be really hard to
Yeah.
lay that down. I didn't plan on talking about this, but it seemed like a good segue. But I was on a 50 and I was having trouble on the second loop. My horse wouldn't eat. In retrospect, what we found out is he had had a previous incident with choking, and
Mm.
we didn't realize it had gotten infected, and he was struggling with that with his throat. That was the problem. But in the middle of the ride, I didn't know what the problem was, and a lovely woman named Eileen came up with her horse and stayed with me to get me through. And she just basically, threw her ride a little bit for me there, just to make sure we could get through. And there's also a lot of very goal-driven in people in endurance that are willing to do that for you. And I think that is a really neat part of the sport, because I haven't seen that in any other equine sport.
And I will concur with that. I, there are so many people who, and I've held back and helped people get through a ride before, because, placing is not that important to me.
Mm-hmm.
My goal is to finish the ride. So, and I've picked up juniors before that, needed a sponsor. It's a family sport. It really is. A lot of people check their egos at the starting line and just ride for the fun of it. That's not to say there aren't some people who are very, very driven to win, and that's all right. It's a big family, and there's room for everybody.
It's so funny because I kind of started thinking of it. It's like kind of like the grocery store, you know, like most of the people in the grocery store are really nice and helpful, but there's maybe 2 or 3 grumpy people at the grocery store, and you're going to have that in any sport. And I
Yes.
definitely have seen that in endurance. at the rides is that, yeah, the majority of just look at it like a grocery store. If you happen to run into the grumpy person, that's okay because, like, here's 99% of the rest of the store is all nice. It's okay, really.
Yeah.
It's good. Um, but yeah, I love how they come together and help each other out, and I love getting those stories. Have you ever been helped out on a ride?
Oh, I'm sure I have been. I got to think here. Well, other than, friends that I've been riding with, starting out with, and because I've had horses that didn't want to eat at lunch, you know, but everything else looked fine, and I went on, and they picked up and they ate later. But I've had friends that, well, let's just walk a little bit and let's just see.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just thought of something. Oh my gosh, this goes back a long time ago. Um, do you know the name Trilby Pedersen?
I don't. Sorry.
Trilby was the queen of miles way back in the 80s. She's still alive today, I believe, but she was never in a hurry. She had some marvelous horses, and she would just go everywhere and ride. And I was at a ride in California. It was a Lake San Antonio ride, and my horse. And I'm thinking, I don't even remember if it was a 50-mile or I think they had a 70-mile ride too. And my horse just wasn't quite right, but wasn't offering. I just wasn't sure what was going on. And we were at the one of the last vet checks, and Trilby said to me, "Let's just walk out of camp and let's just see how your horse does." And I was so grateful for that. You know, so we just and then maybe a couple miles down the trail, my horse picked up and was happy, and we finished the ride. So and Trilby is just a wonderful, wonderful person.
Was there ever a moment where you wanted to quit
Quit endurance or
or
just quit
or the
a
ride? Both. Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say that I have never um, uh, been in a ride and wanted to quit myself because my mantra is if my horse can go on, I will go on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some ego there. I hate to admit it, but I don't want to be the um, the loose wheel, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
If my horse is not ready fit to go on, I have no problem stopping. But as long as I can physically go on, I'm gonna finish. So and there have been some times, and um, I have two Tevis completions, not nearly what a lot of people have, but that's plenty for me. And both completions, I completed within the last 45 minutes of the time allotted. And there were times during those rides where you question your sanity, but once you finish, you are just flooded with gratitude for what
Mm-hmm.
you've accomplished.
What has been your hardest ride, physically or emotionally? Was it Tevis?
Absolutely. I have four starts and two completions. First Tevis was in the early 90s. And when I got pulled at about 40 miles or so, and I thought afterwards that I'm never coming back to Tevis. This is too hard. You can think of all the reasons why not to do it. And my horse was fine the next day, but logistically and cost wise, just it wasn't worth it. Well, it wasn't 30 days later that I was already thinking about next year's Tevis, thinking, okay, I learned a lot, in this first ride, um, things that I could do a little different. So I took the same horse back the next year and we finished.
What did you learn?
Well, I learned that I always thought you had to really push for time on Tevis because, that it's tough trail. And what I learned is if you wouldn't trot in this down this hill or over these rocks on a 50-mile ride, you sure shouldn't do it on a 100-mile ride. So there again, I thought I did some trotting over some trail and I ended up with a lame horse, so
Mm.
so I kept that in mind. I've always been a kind of an under the radar type of person at Tevis. I don't have a whole bunch of crew or anything like that. Do it, and but then I ended up the year I finished riding, catching up with a friend of mine when we finished together, and that was wonderful.
What do you think endurance reveals about a person that other sports don't?
What they're made of, true grit. You can't fake things you have to do it.
Yeah, for some reason, when you said that, the picture in my head was somebody catching the wrong lead and hoping it was behind the judge's back. Well,
Yeah.
you can't do that in endurance, like you said. If you shouldn't have trotted over that area and you did and something happened, then
Mhm.
there was no back to be doing that behind,
No.
and
Mm-mm.
you pay for it immediately.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the same thing, you can't hide a lame horse on a vet check.
Mm-mm. No, and I don't know why you would want to, but no.
No,
No, you
no, but
cannot,
yeah.
and you learn so much. I was at a ride with someone, and the horse was just a little weren't sure we were gonna send her back out, and then, they said, "Here, let's give her some calcium." That was it. She
Mhm.
just needed some calcium, and she was right as rain. So you get to learn so much. So, Marci, the reason we contacted you today was you are the AERC Pacific Southwest Director, and you're on the membership committee. We will be hopefully hosting somebody from AERC so we can get to know everybody. And we wanted to hear what makes the Pacific Southwest region so special.
What makes the Pacific Southwest region so special is the people in it and the rides that we have available to us, the fact that we can ride year round. We have a number of rides that are on private cattle ranches that my other director, John Park, puts on. He puts on 3 rides a year on private ranches that are in the Central Coast area of California. They are just spectacular rides, and they're tough rides. And then we have rides in the winter over in the high desert around Ridgecrest, and that is a wonderful area to ride in the winter. You don't ride there in the summer
Mhm.
on endurance rides. And it's just a great group of ride managers that we have, and people, and a lot of West region riders will come to our area in the winter because it's not good weather up in Northern California. And it's just a great place to train your horses for Tevis or whatever type of ride distance you want to do.
Now, I don't wanna put you on the spot because I know you'll leave some people out, and that's just okay, you don't have a list in front of you. But can you name some of the rides in your region, that
Sure.
come to top of mind?
Sure. Well, we start with our Fire Mountain ride in January. Then in February, we have 20 Mule Team ride.
Mm.
And in March, we have Laurel Mountain ride, and that's a 3-day ride. And many of these rides are multi-day rides. The ride in January at Fire Mountain is a 3-day ride. The ride in February is a 1-day ride, but it has a 100-miler. And Laurel Mountain is a 3-day ride. And then we go in end of March, Cuyama ride. That is a 3-day ride in the foothills between the desert and the Central Coast. And then John Park puts on a ride, usually in April. And then he puts it on one of the ranches that we know over actually, no, the bride in April is over in the Wasna Valley. Then we go to the San Ynez Valley in June for another ride that John puts on. And then John puts on another ride in the fall. And then we have some other rides, the Santa Años ride. Last year, Vera of the Love This Horse Equine Rescue put on a ride over the Thanksgiving weekend. And so we have a multitude of rides that we can go to.
As somebody who's serving on the membership committee, what is it that you think we can do to get riders renewing year after year?
I think it's very important that riders feel valued. And I don't think the value necessarily comes from receiving awards, but that they offer something to the sport. And I think there are so many great things on the AERC website where riders can learn more about conditioning and what's available. That's a wonderful tool, and perhaps we need to advertise that more.
Mhm.
of what's on the AERC website.
What do you wish new riders understood about being a part of AERC, or what seems to be a confusion that they face?
I think there's still some confusion that the term race and ride conjures up to me. I would like more people to think about it as an endurance ride and not an endurance race when they're starting out. Certainly, racing can come later, but think of going to an endurance ride where you're going to get to ride on trails that you've never seen before and ride with groups of people that all love their horses, and you're just going to have an experience that you can't have riding from home.
Since you brought up the word racing versus riding, 1987 there was a ride that
Yes.
AERC decided to pull the sanctioning from. I'm not
Mhm.
sure that the article was clear about why.
I know why.
It is important to have oversight.
Yes, absolutely. In 1987, there was a ride in Catoosa, Oklahoma, that was, and it was a sanctioned endurance ride, and they had shorter distance. They had 15 miles, 25 miles, 50 miles, and I think they might have had a 100-mile ride. And as the ride got closer to the date, as we all know, temperature and humidity can be oppressive in Oklahoma. And when they got to the ride, when riders got to the ride camp, the AERC board member that was there at the ride found out that the ride management was not going to have any veterinary control on the shorter distance rides. I think the 15 and the 25-mile ride would not have any veterinary control on it. It would just be an all-out race. And the AERC people that were there knew that this was a catastrophe waiting to happen, given the weather and the humidity, and they pulled the sanctioning for the whole ride. It was no longer an AERC event, and the ride went on. And the riders on the longer distances did not have problems, the 50 and the 100, but multiple horses died on the shorter distance ride. I think 6 horses died on the trail, and a number of horses died at the end of the ride, and because they were ridden to death, they were raced to death. And this was a ride that also had some prize money attached to it. AERC's wisdom, by pulling that sanctioning, they protected some horses for people who decided not to ride, but they didn't help the horses that died. They weren't able to help the horses that died.
So can you touch on those? Those are two things we've never talked about on the podcast. And with your 23,000 plus miles and riding since 1983, I think you could probably speak to it with some authority. Can you speak to keeping money out of the prize money, as far as awards, keeping money out of endurance, and also keeping vet checks in endurance?
Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately, when you dangle prize money in front of people, I think their brain goes to sleep and they just don't think, because all they think about is, winning some money. So, to protect the horses from the people that are riding, I think it's imperative that prize money not be offered for any endurance, any AERC sanctioned endurance sport. And veterinary controls. The backbone of AERC is the horse and how the horse is cared for and treated during the ride. And while the onus for taking care of the horse is always on the rider, the veterinarians are there as a safety check and seeing that the horses are properly cared for and are fit to continue. That's one of the criteria for going back on the trail. Is the horse fit to continue? Rider isn't always able to make that decision.
And I'm going to try to draw an analogy to driving a car because it's something we all do, usually. And there's people that do some crazy things when you're driving a car, or they have road rage, or just things can go wrong. And like you said, the horse is the backbone of ARC, and not everybody who has a horse would maybe have the clarity to not be racing, or maybe they don't know better. And so, yes, those vet checks are just crucial to prevent things like this 1987 event.
And I agree. And as I mentioned, the vets are not there as adversaries.
No.
The vets and the riders and the vets work in partnership in looking at the horse and whether it's best to continue or not. And I didn't always understand that when I first started. I was kind of afraid of the vets. Oh, are they going to pull my horse? And I that's part of the maturation process of maturing as a rider. You realize that the vets are there to help you, and riders need to understand that, but they are not there to relieve you of any responsibility for your horse. One of the things that, it's not a pet peeve, but it kind of drives me crazy, is vet cards. People taking pictures of their vet cards and say, "Oh, my horse got all A's." The vet only sees that horse in a snapshot. And yes, maybe he gave them all A's, but don't depend on that vet card when you go back to your trailer and then you see your horse isn't eating or something doesn't look right. Don't say, "Oh, but my horse got all A's on the vet card. Yes, I need to go out." And I'm going to share a little experience with you. I've only had horses treated at a couple of rides, and they were both very big learning experiences. This was many years ago, and this is a horse I rode for 15 years. But at a ride, we trailered down to the San Diego area, which was a 6-hour drive, and it was hot down there. And my horse did not camp well the night before, and he didn't eat well. But we went out on the ride. We came into lunch and went through the vet check. He vetted through perfectly. He had all A's, but went back to the trailer, and what did he do? He colicked. So, that's a great example of the vet card doesn't tell you everything. And I treated him, we gave him fluids, and he was fine. We went on to compete for many more years. But that's just an example of what can happen.
When you go to a horse show and you enter classes at a horse show, you're not paying for a vet. So if you look at an endurance ride and you think, wow, this kind of expensive, remember you're paying for a vet to be there to look over your horse.
Multiple times, before you even start, they look at your horse. I'm just going to throw in another little segue of what I've seen over the years. It used to be that endurance rides, you paid, the entry fees were like $1 a mile. So if you were riding 25 miles, the entry fee was $25. Riding 50, most 50-mile rides were around $50. Obviously, times have changed, but, now 25-mile rides are sanctioned, so there's a sanctioning fee involved, and rider fees where they used to not be, and same thing for the higher distances.
So, Marci, if somebody was sitting on the fence about joining AERC or not, what would you tell them about encouraging them to join AERC?
I would say jump in the water, because you don't learn to swim sitting on the fence. Does that make any sense?
That's perfect. That's short and sweet, and it's a story picture, easy to remember.
Yeah. There, especially with all the great information that's out there today, and just get your feet wet and support the organization. I think supporting the organization is so important because of everything that AERC does. It's not just endurance riding. We have directors who are part of the American Horse Council, and they do they walk the halls of Congress to lobby on horse activities. And there is the information that's available for veterinarians through the AERC Vet Committee. And we have some really smart people on as AERC directors.
And trail advocacy, correct?
Absolutely, trail advocacy. And that's what a lot of walking the halls of Congress, the American Horse Council, and working on trails at the local level, it's all encouraged and supported by AERC.
I do think, does AERC give out grants for trail development and preservation?
It does. And, there's information on the website on how to apply for grants. In fact, the board just approved a a grant for trail surfaces at a horse camp that's used by endurance riders and hosts an endurance run. And often our grants are in partnership with other local horse organizations that are involved.
I think our local trails may have been a benefit of some of these grants also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Marci, I wanted to ask you, after 4 decades in endurance, what are you most grateful for?
Wow. I'm grateful for all the wonderful people I have met who I never would have had the opportunity to meet if I hadn't been on my horse riding down the trail.
If there was only one place left that you could do one more sunrise ride at, where would that be?
I would say Cuyama XP Endurance Ride, just uh, west of the town of New Cuyama. It's halfway between Bakersfield and Highway 101. It's all on private ranches, and it is an old land grant area, and it's not open to the public. And there's just wonderful trails there that without that endurance ride, you would never get to ride on.
What do you have planned for 2026?
I have learned that I do not plan out a whole season of endurance rides. I plan out the next ride that I'm going to. I finish a ride and then I plan for the next ride. Because sure as shooting, when you try to plan out a whole year, it doesn't work. so, having completed the 20 Mule Team ride, my next ride will be the Laurel Mountain ride, the early part of March. And then I'll just go from there. And after that, I'll say, this goes well, then I'm going to go to Cuyama and on and on. I will tell you a story about that ride. 2 years ago, we woke up to some snow in the morning, which is very, very unusual for that area because it's not real high altitude at all. But there was on the hills around us, there was snow. It dissipated and it was gone, but very unusual for that area. And I'm just going to throw in another ride that I did years ago, the Outlaw Virgin ride. One of the it was a 5-day ride, and I rode all 5 days. And it snowed overnight, and so we rode all day, all morning at least, through the snow. But what I found out about this was in Utah. The snow in Utah isn't wet. It was very dry snow, and so it wasn't bad to ride in at all. But that was a beautiful ride.
It sounds like it. Marci, I just want to say thank you for being a part of Endurance Horse Podcast. And your 40 plus years in this sport is no small thing. And I don't think there's that many people who can say that they've had 40 plus years in the sport. You have seen generations come and go. You've seen change. You've seen a lot of change in the sport, and you've seen growth. And you're still here, you're riding, you're serving, and you're still believing in endurance. And I think that's a great testament to the sport within itself. That kind of commitment is truly rare. And we're really grateful for all your service and all of your miles.
Well, thank you so much. I feel very blessed.
Thank you. And that is a wrap for this episode of Endurance Horse Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to AERC for working with us to make this type of episode possible. 23,000 miles. Those were not rushed miles. Since 1983, Marci Cunningham has showed up for her horses, for the trail, and for this sport. So if you're listening today, whether you have 100 miles or 10,000 miles, I want you to know that all of your miles matter. Keep riding, keep saddling up, keep showing up, and if you can, steward the sport somehow in your own way. Whether it's sharing your rides and your events on social media, or if it's volunteering at a ride, or becoming an AERC member today, even if you don't plan on doing a ride. And for our part, if today's episode made you smile once, or think, or feel a little bit more connected to this sport and the horses, here's how you can help us keep this podcast moving forward. Please share this episode with a friend who loves horses. Text it to them, post it on your social media, talk about it at the barn, and please leave a kind review wherever you listen. Those words are truly meant to help riders find our community. And if you would really want to support this podcast, come ride with us at one of the Warhorse Challenges. These are virtual events. You can check it out on warhorseendurance.com, but we do give away great medals, patches, and buckles, all kinds of different things. They are fun. They are good. I get such good feedback on the completion awards, and they do honor the miles with your horses. They are what keeps this microphone on and this podcast possible. So head on over to warhorseendurance.com and find one of our events to sign up for. You won't regret it. And the best part of the challenges is clearly the Facebook group. Go into Facebook and type in Warhorse Challenges, and you should be able to find our group. It's a private group, so you have to request to join and just agree to the rules. And we'll be happy to encourage you there, cheer you on, and it is supporting the podcast by helping our group grow. We would truly love to have you over there. So this is Endurance Horse Podcast signing off for now. Every mile memory. Endurance Horse Podcast is produced by Christina Hike Photography, LLC, and is a Warhorse Endurance production.